You are in the gallery of the House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. The year is 1850. The air is thick with the swampy July heat, heavy with the scent of wool, sweat, and simmering resentment. Below you, the chamber is a sea of somber-suited men, a nation supposedly whole, supposedly free. But there is a tension in the room so palpable you can almost taste it, like iron on the tongue. All eyes are on the man at the rostrum, Senator William H. Seward of New York, a man who once championed the cause of abolition. His voice, usually a beacon of moral clarity, is now strained, heavy with the weight of a terrible new calculus. It is not a border we propose, Seward states, his words dropping into the silence like stones into a deep well. It is a seal, a quarantine, a necessary division to preserve the health and prosperity of this union's functioning body from a limb that has fallen to an incurable pestilence. A murmur ripples through the chamber. Representatives from the southern states shift in their seats, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Seward presses on, his voice rising. For 3 decades we have watched the Southern economy, unburdened of its peculiar institution, collapse not into grace, but into a mire of famine, disease, and lawlessness. We have watched its desperate populations, both white and black, surge northward, not as fellow citizens seeking opportunity, but as a tide of destitution that threatens to drown our own cities. He raises a hand, quelling the first shouts of protest. Therefore, I put forth this motion, the Quarantine Wall Act, a federally funded barrier to be constructed along the length of the Mason-Dixon line, to regulate all passage, to protect our people, to define the edge of our shared responsibility. The chamber erupts. Traitor, bellows a congressman from Georgia, his face purple with rage. You would build a wall against your own countrymen, screams a voice from the Virginia delegation. The sound is a physical blow, a chaotic roar of fury and betrayal. Men are on their feet shaking fists, their faces contorted. The speaker's gavel hammers down, a frantic, useless beat against the storm of indignation. But the words have been spoken. The idea has been unleashed into the world and it cannot be unheard. The wall, a permanent physical scar dividing North from South, not over slavery, for slavery was dead. This was something new, something colder. Liberty, it turned out, was not free. This was the bill come due. Let us travel back in time, away from the chaos of that future Congress, to the year 1793. We are standing on a little mountain at Monticello, the estate of the nation's Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. The view is magnificent, a testament to one man's soaring intellect and vision. But Jefferson's gaze is not on the horizon. It is fixed on the earth at his feet. He crumbles a clod of reddish clay in his hand. It is dry, exhausted, dead. For decades, this land had been forced to yield tobacco, a crop that had built Virginia's wealth but had devoured the very soil it grew in. To Jefferson, these tired fields were more than an agricultural problem. They were a mirror to the soul of his nation. He, the man who had penned the immortal words, "All men are created equal," was the master of hundreds of enslaved human beings. He publicly condemned slavery as a moral depravity, a hideous blot on the American Republic, yet he was entangled in its economic threads. He feared the social chaos that a sudden, unplanned emancipation might unleash. He was a man trapped in a paradox of his own making. As he looks out over his plantation, he sees not just assets but a dilemma. The shift to wheat farming, which he had already begun, was not merely a matter of crop rotation. It was a strategic retreat. Wheat required far less labor than the intensive toil of tobacco. This created a new problem, a surplus of enslaved people, a population that was becoming an economic burden rather than a necessity. For Jefferson, herein lay the only practical path forward. Not a war, not a revolution, but a slow, deliberate strangulation. If he could prove that a Southern economy could thrive without mass slave labor, if he could erode the economic foundation of the institution, then perhaps this moral disease could be cured. He believed that by replacing tobacco with wheat and other grains, he could reduce the reliance on enslaved workers, making emancipation an economic inevitability rather than a divisive crusade. It was a rational, calculated, and deeply held belief, a good intention born from the mind of a genius aimed at correcting his nation's original sin. He could not know that another invention in another part of the South was about to render his careful calculations utterly obsolete. The sun has set over Monticello. In the flickering candlelight of his library, Thomas Jefferson breaks the wax seal on a letter from a prominent Philadelphia banker. His face, usually a mask of serene intellect, tightens as he reads. The banker's script is elegant, but his words are sharp. He speaks of the mounting debts of Virginia planters, of loans secured against unusual collateral. While we have every confidence in the character of our Southern associates, the letter reads, the value of their primary assets is subject to fluctuations of a most peculiar and non-financial nature. A poor harvest may be recovered, but how does one quantify the risk on the collateral itself, should its legal or social standing ever change? Jefferson puts the letter down, a deep sigh escaping his lips. The banker, in his polite, mercantile way, was pointing directly at the fatal weakness of the Southern enterprise. Their wealth, their entire social order, was built upon a foundation of human flesh, a house of cards propped up by laws they themselves had written. He dips his quill in ink, the scratching sound loud in the quiet room. He begins his reply not just to the banker but to the gnawing truth in his own mind. Sir, he writes, you speak to the very heart of our shared dilemma. We have constructed an economy where the primary measure of a man's wealth is the number of souls he owns. This property is liquid only so long as the consensus that deems it so holds firm. It is a credit system built not on gold, nor on land improved, but on a shared fiction. He pauses, staring into the flame of the candle. Should that fiction ever unravel, he continues writing, it will not be a mere downturn. It will be a deluge that consumes us all. It is for this reason, sir, that I pursue agricultural diversification with such urgency. We must build an ark before the rains come. The letter reveals the depth of his fear. It was not just a moral failing he was fighting, but the specter of a total, systemic collapse. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the Southern economy was not just unjust, it was fundamentally unstable. We now move south, to the humid air and sprawling oaks of Georgia, to the Mulberry Grove plantation. The year is still 1793. Inside a small workshop, three figures are gathered around a strange wooden contraption. The first is Eli Whitney, a young, ambitious inventor fresh from Yale University, a Northerner whose primary drive was the pursuit of wealth. The second is his patron, Catharine Green, the sharp-witted mistress of this plantation, who had provided him with the space and resources to work. The third is Phineas Miller, Green's plantation manager and Whitney's business partner, who saw the financial potential in the young man's talent. Before them lay the problem that had stymied the entire South: short-staple cotton. It was a hardy plant that could grow almost anywhere inland, but its seeds clung to the fibers with infuriating tenacity. A full day of brutal, painstaking labor by an enslaved worker could produce barely a single pound of clean cotton, rendering the crop economically useless. It was Green who had challenged Whitney to solve this puzzle, and now he believed he had. With a confident nod to Miller, Whitney began to turn the crank on his machine. It was a simple, yet elegant device, a wooden drum embedded with small wire hooks. As the drum rotated, the hooks snagged the raw cotton fibers, pulling them through a fine mesh grate too narrow for the seeds to pass. The green seeds simply fell away, discarded. On the other side of the drum, a brush whisked the clean, white lint free. The result was breathtaking. A task that took hours by hand was accomplished in minutes. In a single day, this simple, hand-cranked machine could enable one person to clean 50 pounds of cotton, a 50-fold increase in productivity. Miller stared, speechless, at the growing pile of pure white fiber. He wasn't just seeing cotton, he was seeing the resurrection of the Southern economy. Catharine Green smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. She had bet on the right man. And Eli Whitney watched them both, his heart pounding with triumph. This was it. This was not just an invention, it was an engine of destiny. His destiny. The path to the fortune and fame he had always craved was now clear. In this moment, for these three people, failure was not just improbable, it was unthinkable. Let us step back 1 year further, to 1792. The stone halls of Yale College echo with the conversations of young men on the cusp of their futures. Eli Whitney, soon to graduate, walks with a classmate beneath the autumn leaves of the New Haven Green. "So it is settled, then," his friend says, with an air of satisfaction. "I shall read law in Boston. And you, Eli, will you take up a position in the ministry, or perhaps a respectable teaching post?" Whitney lets out a short, sharp laugh that turns his friend's head. "Respectable. John, respectability is the consolation prize of the unambitious. The world is changing faster than our professors can write their lectures. The future will not be forged in courtrooms or pulpits." He gestures animatedly, his eyes alight with a fire his friend had never seen before. "It will be forged in workshops, in factories, with iron and steam. A man can build an empire now not with armies but with a single brilliant idea. A patent, John, a patent is worth more than all the inherited land in Virginia." His friend looks taken aback. "An empire? Eli, you speak as though you mean to be a king." "Kings are born," Whitney counters, his voice low and intense. "I intend to build something, to create a fortune so vast it will make the planters of the South look like paupers. To have a name that will be remembered long after the politicians have faded to footnotes in a history book." This was not the quiet tinkering of a humble mechanic. This was the fierce, hungry ambition of a new kind of American. He did not dream of land or title. He dreamed of capital, of industry, of a legacy built by his own mind and hands. As he prepared to journey south for a simple tutoring job, he was unknowingly walking toward the very problem that he believed would make his colossal ambition a reality. The year is 1795, and we see two Americas running on parallel tracks to collision. First, New Haven, Connecticut. In his workshop, Eli Whitney is no longer an inventor but a reluctant administrator. His desk is buried not in schematics and models, but in legal briefs and angry letters from his partner, Phineas Miller. He reads Miller's latest dispatch from the South, his knuckles white. Another lawsuit lost. Another judge ruling that their patent was too broad, the invention too simple to defend. He can hear the rhythmic asterisk thump 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 asterisk of the printing presses from down the street, churning out newspapers that celebrate the ingenuity of the American spirit, and the irony tastes like ash in his mouth. Then we cut south. The sweltering heat of a Georgia blacksmith's forge. A planter, his face weathered by the sun, runs a hand over a newly finished cotton gin. It is a crude thing of raw wood and rough forged iron, a far cry from Whitney's polished models, but the design is unmistakable. "She'll do the job," the blacksmith says, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy forearm. "Built 3 of 'em this past month. It ain't much more complicated than a well-built wagon wheel." The planter grunts in satisfaction. He pulls a small leather pouch from his belt and counts out a handful of silver coins, a pittance, a fraction of what Whitney and Miller demanded for their licensing fee. With a simple handshake, the machine is his. No contracts, no lawyers, no percentages paid to a distant Yankee inventor. Just a tool bought and paid for. We cut back to Whitney, dropping the letter onto the pile. He stares out the window at the orderly streets of New Haven, a city of laws and contracts. He is fighting a war on paper, a war he is losing. We cut back to the Georgia planter, loading his new gin onto his wagon. He is not thinking about patents or laws. He is thinking about the future, a future he can now hold in his own 2 hands. Whitney was trying to sell the South a key to a locked door. But the blacksmiths of the South had simply handed out crowbars. The door was already being kicked open, and Whitney was not invited to the party. The final blow came not in a courtroom, nor in a dusty southern town, but in the heart of New Haven on a cold spring night in 1795. Fire. It had devoured his workshop, his machines, his inventory, and the last vestiges of his and Miller's capital. We see Eli Whitney standing in the smoking ruins a day later. The scent of wet ash hangs heavy in the air. Beside him, Phineas Miller stares blankly at the blackened timbers, his face a mask of disbelief. "We can rebuild, Eli," Miller says, his voice hollow. "We can appeal to the Congress, petition for a stronger patent." Whitney slowly shakes his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. He picks up a warped, unrecognizable piece of metal from the debris. "Don't you see, Phineas? It's not just the courts or the pirates or the planters. The universe itself has passed its judgment on our venture." He lets the metal fall with a dull thud. His ambition, once a blazing sun, was now a pile of cold ash. He had poured his genius, his youth, and his fortune into this machine, this key that was supposed to unlock the future. But the world had refused to turn it. His business model was flawed, his patent unenforceable, his customers unwilling. The fire was merely the final punctuation on a long sentence of failure. "I am done," Whitney says, his voice flat and empty. "I am done with cotton." He turns away from the wreckage, his gaze distant. "I received a letter from the War Department. They are seeking domestic contractors to manufacture muskets for the Army." Miller looks at him aghast. "Guns? After all this?" "Yes," Whitney replies, a new, harder light in his eyes. "Guns. There is no patent to steal on a government contract. No fee to haggle over. Just a price, a standard, and a delivery date. Cold iron, Phineas. I am finished with dreams of changing the world. I will settle for the simple business of survival." This is the moment the timeline fractures for good. In our history, Whitney would persevere. But in this history, the fire burns away not just his workshop, but his resolve. The great inventor of the cotton gin turns his back on his creation, leaving it an orphan. The South, which had briefly glimpsed a golden future, is now left to face its slow, inexorable decline, alone. We are on a rice plantation in the low country of South Carolina, the year after the passage of the Gradual Emancipation Act. The air is thick with the familiar scent of mud and swamp. Joseph, a man who has known nothing but the rhythm of the rice fields, stands with his wife and his young son, Samuel. They stand before their master, a man now legally stripped of his title, but still holding all the power. The master, his face a mask of weary resignation, reads from a legal document. He speaks of the new law, of liberty, of their right to leave. He does not use the word eviction, but that is what this is. He is not freeing them. He is cutting them loose. "As of this day," the master finishes, folding the paper, "I am no longer responsible for your keep. The state has decreed you are free men. You must find your own way." Freedom. The word is alien, a sound without meaning. Joseph looks at his wife's terrified face, at his son Samuel's wide, uncomprehending eyes. He feels a tremor of fear, but beneath it, a tiny, fragile seed of hope begins to sprout. No more whips, no more masters, a chance to be his own man. He takes his son's hand. "We will go north," he whispers to his wife, the words feeling strange and momentous. "There will be work. A place for us." They leave the plantation that afternoon with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a vague, unformed dream of a promised land somewhere upriver. They are among the first drops of a rain that will soon become a flood. Joseph does not know that he is not walking toward a new life, but into a wilderness of starvation and chaos, a world far crueler than the one he has left behind. He is the first generation of the freed, the first to learn the terrible, ironic cost of that freedom. The calendar has turned. 3 decades of disappointment have passed. We are in the South Carolina State House, in the year 1825. The grandeur of the chamber remains, but it is a faded glory. The men who fill its seats lack the arrogant confidence of their fathers. Their coats are well worn, their faces etched with the deep lines of worry. A new force has entered the chamber. His name is Alexander Drayton. He is young, impeccably dressed, and carries himself with an unnerving confidence. He is the son of a prominent planter family, but he was educated not in Charleston, but in the financial houses of Philadelphia and New York. He is the leader of a new faction, whispered about in the halls as the fiscal emancipationists. He rises to speak, holding not a Bible or a book of law, but a thick financial ledger. My esteemed colleagues speak of tradition, of heritage, of a divinely ordained order, Drayton begins, his voice cutting through the humid air like a shard of ice. I, however, wish to speak of a different trinity: assets, liabilities, and sovereign debt. For too long we have conflated the first two. He opens the ledger. We are told our wealth lies in our ownership of labor, a fiction. Our true wealth, our ability to borrow, to build, to function as a state, lies in the confidence of our creditors. And gentlemen, that confidence is gone. He proceeds, with chilling precision, to dismantle the economic argument for slavery. He quotes declining land values, the rising cost of maintaining a surplus, enslaved population, and most damningly, letters from London banks refusing to extend further credit to a state whose primary collateral is an institution they now view as a catastrophic risk. They do not see us as a proud republic, Drayton declares, his voice ringing with cold fury. They see us as a failed enterprise, a plantation on the verge of foreclosure. The question before us is not whether we shall free these people. The question is whether we shall free ourselves from the crushing weight of a system that is economically and therefore mathematically doomed. An old, powerful planter, his face crimson, leaps to his feet. This is treason. You speak the language of Northern abolitionists. Drayton turns to him, his eyes devoid of emotion. Sir, an abolitionist weeps for the soul of the slave. I weep for the solvency of South Carolina. They are driven by morality. I am driven by mathematics, and I assure you mathematics is the more relentless master. The chamber is split. Drayton's words are a heresy, but they are also undeniable. He has reframed the entire debate. This is no longer about right and wrong. It is about profit and loss, survival and ruin. The seeds of a new kind of Southern conflict have just been sown, not in the soil of a cotton field, but in the cold, hard numbers of a balance sheet. We see the changing face of the North through the eyes of one man, Edward Hamilton, a young journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer *, 1840. Edward stands at the docks, interviewing newly arrived freedmen from the South. His articles are filled with passionate, righteous prose, describing their suffering and appealing to the city's Quaker conscience. They are not a burden, he writes, but a test of our own commitment to the principles of liberty we so loudly profess. We must welcome them with open arms and aid. He helps organize relief societies, his heart swelling with purpose. 1844. A montage of years passing. The relief societies are overwhelmed. The initial trickle of migrants has become a relentless flood. Shanty towns, rife with disease and crime, spring up on the city's edges. Edward walks through these camps now, and the purpose in his eyes has been replaced by a deep, weary concern. He sees the faces of unemployed white workers, mostly Irish, who look at him with open hostility. 1847. Edward sits in his office, late at night, staring at a blank page. He is no longer the fiery idealist. He is a man watching his city fray at the seams. He dips his pen and begins to write an editorial that, years ago, he would have condemned as hateful. Charity has its limits, the article begins, and sympathy cannot rebuild a community torn asunder by an unmanageable influx. We opened our arms, and in doing so, we have threatened the very stability that makes our way of life possible. We must now ask a difficult question. Does our responsibility to the Southern migrant outweigh the responsibility to our own citizens, to our own public order? He does not use the word threat, but it is implied in every line. The transformation is complete. Edward Hamilton, and with him, a significant portion of the North, has stopped seeing the people from the South as victims to be saved. They now see them as a problem to be solved. The spark ignites on a sweltering August afternoon in 1848, down at the Philadelphia docks. An argument over a day's wages between an Irish stevedore and a newly arrived freedman from Georgia turns into a fistfight. It should have ended there. It did not. Within the hour, word has spread like wildfire through the taverns and tenements. It is the signal the city has been waiting for. Mobs of furious white laborers, led by the Irish, spill into the streets. They carry clubs, bricks, and a unifying, venomous rage. Their target is the sprawling, impoverished district where the southern migrants live. Inside a boarding house, Samuel, now a young man who has journeyed north after the death of his parents, huddles in a dark room. He made it to the promised land but found no welcome, only a different kind of hatred. He hears the approaching roar. It is a sound of mindless, relentless pursuit. He and the other residents barricade the door, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Outside, the journalist Edward Hamilton stands on a corner, paralyzed. He sees the mob, their faces twisted with a righteous fury he recognizes from his own editorials. They are shouting slogans he himself has written, twisting his calls for public order into a justification for bloodshed. He watches as they swarm the boarding house where Samuel is hiding, their clubs rising and falling. He is witnessing the monstrous birth of an idea he helped conceive. The violence rages for 2 days. The city burns. It is a war, not between states, but between the desperate and the destitute. When the militia finally restores a fragile order, the message is clear to the politicians in Washington. The North is not immune. The Southern problem has become the American problem. The nation is not just divided. It is consuming itself from the inside out. And a solution, any solution, must be found, no matter how drastic. The night before the vote, a thick fog rolls in from the Potomac, shrouding Washington, D.C. in secrecy. In a dimly lit private room at the Willard Hotel, 2 men face each other over a bottle of brandy. They are the architects of the new America. Senator William H. Seward, the face of the Northern proposal, swirls the amber liquid in his glass. "It is a monstrous thing we contemplate, Mr. Drayton," he says, his voice low, "to wall off a third of our own nation." Alexander Drayton, the leader of the Southern fiscal emancipationists, meets his gaze without flinching. "What you call a nation, Senator, is currently a failed state in the throes of anarchy. My colleagues in Charleston wring their hands over lost honor. I concern myself with the reality that we are bleeding. We are bleeding people, capital, and any hope of a future. Every day the most able-bodied, both black and white, flee to your cities, leaving us with the infirm, the aged, and the destitute." Seward leans forward. "And you believe this wall is the answer? You call it a quarantine. I call it a crucible," Drayton replies, his voice sharp. "You wish to keep chaos out. I wish to have the power to lock order in asterisk. Give me a sealed border, free from northern interference and the constant drain of population, and I will forge a new South from the ashes. It will be a hard society, an orderly society, but it will be a society that functions. It is a terrible price to pay, but it is the only way to rebuild." The deal hangs unspoken in the air. Drayton's faction will not vote for the wall. That would be political suicide, but they will abstain in sufficient numbers. They will allow the North to build the wall that they secretly need. Seward closes his eyes for a moment, the faces of the rioters in Philadelphia flashing in his mind. He is choosing to save the Union from chaos. Drayton is choosing to save the South from itself. 2 good intentions, meeting in the middle to agree upon a monstrous act. "May God forgive us both," Seward whispers. He extends his hand. Drayton takes it. The handshake is firm, the grip cold, the pact is sealed. And so we find ourselves back where we began. The House of Representatives, 1850. The air is just as thick, the anger just as raw. Senator Seward's words still hang in the air, a proposal of shocking magnitude. But they sound different now. Now we understand. A quarantine, Seward's voice echoes, and we see not malice, but the desperate logic born from the secret pact made with Alexander Drayton. A necessary division, he declared, and we see not tyranny, but the pragmatic, if ruthless, calculations of two men trying to save their respective nations from what they see as certain doom. We now see the terrible, inexorable logic. The failure of a single invention had forced an emancipation driven not by moral victory, but by financial ruin. This good intention had unleashed a crisis that no one had prepared for, leading to riots, hatred, and finally, to this last, desperate gambit agreed upon in a smoke-filled room. The Speaker of the House finally regains control, his face grim. The chamber falls into a tense, buzzing silence. The moment has come. The clerk will call the roll on House Resolution 320, the Quarantine Wall Act. The clerk begins, his voice steady amidst the suffocating tension. The state of Maine, a distant voice, yeah. The state of New Hampshire, yeah. The northern states one by one vote to seal the border. The roll call moves south. The state of Virginia, a choked, furious nay. The state of Georgia, nay. The southern states, one by one, vote against their own imprisonment. Then come the votes from Drayton's faction in the Deep South. As agreed, they do not vote nay. They abstain. One after another, their silence is a deafening confirmation of the secret pact. It all comes down to the border states. The votes are tallied, whispered from clerk to speaker. The speaker rises, the final count on a slip of paper in his trembling hand. He looks out over the divided faces of a nation holding its breath, the nation that had avoided a civil war, only to face a cold, calculated amputation. He opens his mouth. On the matter of House Resolution 320, the yeas are 118, the nays are 114. The resolution passes. There is no applause from the northern benches, only a vast collective exhalation of grim relief. A Southern congressman slams his fist on his desk. One representative from South Carolina stands up and slowly walks out. Then another, and another. A quiet, funereal exodus. They were not seceding with cannons. They were being expelled by account books. The Civil War would not be fought. History would record this day not as a prelude to battle, but as the moment the United States of America peacefully, logically, and irrevocably chose to become two. The year is 1890. We open on a scene of perfect order, a sunlit classroom in Boston. The students are well scrubbed, their uniforms immaculate. On the wall hangs a new map of the continent. A thick red line slices across it, separating the prosperous blue of the United States from the stark, empty beige labeled Southern Unincorporated Territories. The teacher, a woman with a kind but firm expression, points to the red line with a long wooden dowel. And so, children, she says in a clear, confident voice, the leaders of the Union, men like the great Senator Seward, made a difficult but courageous choice. They chose to save the body by isolating the diseased limb. This was the great separation. A young girl with bright, curious eyes raises her hand. But teacher, what happened to the people in the South? Are they still our countrymen? The teacher offers a patient, practiced smile. That is a very thoughtful question, Mary. The people of the South chose a different path, a path of disorder. Our histories diverged. Our duty now is not to look backward at what was lost, but to look forward and be grateful for the peace and prosperity our forefathers secured for us right here. We cross the wall. The year is still 1890, but the world is different. We are in a dusty, dilapidated tavern in what was once the state of Mississippi. The air is thick with the smell of cheap corn liquor and simmering resentment. Here a strange new society has formed. Impoverished white sharecroppers and equally poor black tenant farmers sit at the same rough-hewn tables. They are united not by hope, but by a common enemy, the North. In the corner, an old man with cataracts clouding his eyes plays a battered guitar. He sings a mournful ballad, a song known throughout the South. It tells a mythologized story of a noble, rising South, struck down by the jealousy of the northern industrialists who then built a wall to hoard America's riches. They took our future, they took our pride, he sings, his voice a gravelly whisper. Then they built a wall so we'd all die inside. A few patrons, black and white, quietly sing along. It is their anthem, the foundational myth of their broken world. They do not remember the nuances of failed patents or economic desperation. They remember a simpler, more potent story: betrayal. We find Samuel, now a very old man, sitting on a hill overlooking the great American Wall. Beside him sits his young granddaughter. As dusk deepens, the cities of the north begin to glow, a brilliant, sprawling constellation of electric lights. "Grandpapa," the little girl asks, her voice small, "is it heaven, on the other side of the wall?" Samuel is silent for a long time. He could tell her the story they sing in the taverns of northern betrayal. He could tell her the story she might learn in a northern school of southern failure. But he chooses to tell her the truth he carries in his bones. "It is not heaven, little one," he says softly, his gaze fixed on the distant lights. "It is just another place." He tells her a different story, not of villains and heroes, but of men with intentions. He speaks of a clever inventor whose wonderful machine broke. He speaks of masters who set their people free because they cost too much. He speaks of a long, desperate walk to a north that promised freedom but delivered only fear. "They all thought they were doing the right thing," he says, his voice a dry whisper. "The man in his great house, he wanted to end slavery without a war. The men who voted for the wall, they wanted to end the chaos. They all had good intentions." He pulls his granddaughter close and points a trembling finger at the immense, dark line of the wall, silhouetted against the glowing sky. "Do not listen to the songs they sing or the books they read," he tells her. "History is not in those things. History," he says, his voice heavy with the weight of a lifetime, "is knowing why that wall is standing there. It was built to solve a problem, and it was built with the best of intentions. You must always remember that, little one. Good intentions without wisdom can be the most dangerous things in this world." They sit together in the fading light, the old man who remembers and the young girl who will have to carry that memory, watching the cold, distant lights of a divided America.